Hello everyone, no one of consequence here, back again with a new video. This is episode 76 in a series which recounts my ongoing Dungeons & Dragons campaign, which is now in its 10th year. So as always, spoiler alert, in this video I will be revealing details found in this adventure module. Also revealed will be ideas borrowed from this free supplement called D4 City of Spiders, which can be downloaded from the Greyhawk Grognard website. Keep in mind, this is not a standalone product. You must also have a copy of D3 Vault of the Drow to make full use of it. Moving on, here is the player character roster for the Descent into the Depths campaign. We have 8 characters being controlled by 5 different players. And here are the NPCs currently with the party. As usual, we have the party's 2 guard dogs. There is also the Deep Gnome Jomchurt and the Goblin Horko, both of whom were purchased from the Drow slave market so that the characters could pose as slave traders. As mentioned in the last video, both were promised their freedom once the characters had accomplished their mission. Where we left off last time, the Drow noble Ned had told the characters of another Elder Elemental God relic, a stone tablet currently in the possession of the Temple of Neril. She encouraged the characters to try and gain access to it, theorizing that it might hold information on how to banish the Elder Elemental God forever. Ned also agreed to help the characters enter the Drow noble lands by telling the bridge guards to be watching for a group of surface dweller slave traders and to allow them to cross. As a reminder, Neril is also called the Reaper, and he is the Greyhawk god of death, darkness, murder, cruelty, and the underworld. His cult, and those of other evil deities, all have temples within Arrowhigh Sinlu. These temples are located together in an area just beyond the slum-like foreign quarter of the city. This meant that the characters would once again have to pass through the foreign quarter in order to reach the Temple District. The Temple District proved to be a high-class but ominous-looking neighborhood. Wandering the streets, the character soon came across a shrine dedicated to Loth. Although Loth's primary temple is located within Arrowhigh Sinlu, that place is restricted to the Drow only. This secondary temple is primarily for the use of non-Drow worshippers of the Spider Queen. A short distance further along, the characters found themselves on Temple Street and standing directly in front of the Temple of Neril itself. Shrines dedicated to other evil gods could be seen further along the street in both directions. The party decided to first send in a few characters to case the joint, and perhaps even locate the stone tablet. Gorbadoc, Varys, and Thorol were selected to do this recon. Entering the temple, they were greeted by a priest who asked if they had come to sacrifice to Neril. Gorbadoc did all the talking, while Varys and Thorol remained silent. Gorbadoc adopted a very haughty, arrogant tone, demanding to know what Neril could do for him if he made a sacrifice. He also insisted that he be allowed to inspect the altar first. The priest refused to allow Gorbadoc to approach the high altar because he was not a cleric of Neril. Gorb then said he would bring a sacrifice, but only if he be allowed to stand at the altar and participate in the ceremony. Again, the priest refused, and for the same reason as before. He said that Gorbadoc would be able to observe everything from the worship floor, and that Neril would hear his supplications from there. At this point, another priest of Neril approached, apparently the temple's head priest. After being told what was going on and of Gorbadok's demands, he immediately became suspicious of the character's true motive for being there. Gorbadok, Varys, and Thorol were then escorted back outside. Once the priest saw the other characters loitering nearby, they were certain that these prospective worshippers were not what they claimed to be. They warned Gorbadok and the others to stay out of the temple and do not return again. The characters huddled up a short distance away to discuss what to do next. They briefly considered just storming the temple, but then concluded that the city watch would probably arrive very quickly, and then they would be trapped inside. In fact, a Drow street patrol had gone marching by while Gorbadok and the others were still inside the temple. The characters then noticed that the priest of Neril was still watching them from the temple doorway, so they decided to move to a spot out of sight from here. The plan they settled on was one that had been used before. Garrett and Gorbadok would put on their rings of invisibility, then Thorol would cast a haste spell on the entire party. Garrett and Gorb would then dash to the temple, hopefully undetected, and look for the stone tablet. Both characters were also wearing boots of elven kind, which would conceal the sound of their footsteps. Thorol first gave Gorbadok a pen and some paper. If the stone tablet was found, he would quickly make a copy of the inscription, even if he could not read it himself. A short while later, Garrett and Gorbadok, now hasted and invisible, dashed back into the Temple of Neril. Quickly moving along the interior wall of the temple, Gorbadok checked a stone door, which proved to be locked. Quietly whispering together, they agreed that the stone tablet could very well be located behind it. They decided that Gorbadok would move closer to the altar to try and determine if the tablet was somewhere around there. Meanwhile, Garrett would begin working on picking the locked door. Gorbadok was reluctant to approach the altar too closely, for fear that the nearby succubus might detect his presence. At any rate, he saw nothing that would indicate that the stone tablet was around there. Meanwhile, Garrett continued working on the locked stone door. The lock was not too sophisticated, and Garrett quickly succeeded in picking it. He pushed the door open slightly, but it was dark inside, and he could see or hear nothing. He was also afraid of opening the door too far, for fear that one of the priests might notice. Gorbadok returned to assist because he has infravision, and he could also squeeze through the narrow opening Garrett had made. Gorbadok entered into a small room containing a few nondescript worship-related items. However, there was also a large stone tablet with strange writing on it. Positive that this was the item they were looking for, Gorbadok began scribbling down a copy of the engraving. I had ruled that since Gorb was still hasted, he could make the copy quicker than it would normally take. As he was finishing up, Gorbadok suddenly became aware of a strange glow filling the room. Turning, he saw that a skeletal apparition had materialized nearby. Even more alarming, it seemed to be staring right at him even though he was still invisible. Still under the effects of the haste spell, Gorb bolted from the room, telling Garrett to run for it as he passed by. Gorbadok and Garrett broke into a full run, no longer caring if they made any noise while fleeing. The glowing skeletal apparition let out a terrible screeching wail and pursued. Now, before setting out on this little caper, Gorbanak had taken from his pack a small banner of the Elder Elemental God, which he had picked up back in the fire giant lair. As he and Garrett were fleeing, he purposely dropped it on the temple floor behind him. Meanwhile, the temple priests were now also alerted to the intrusion and began running towards the entrance. The skeletal spirit was apparently bound to the temple because it did not pursue Gorbanak and Garrett past the entrance. However, the priests did run out into the street, searching for any fleeing intruders. Everyone in the party was still under the effect of Thorol's haste spell, and they quickly vacated the area. However, some characters can run faster than others, and they even rushed past a band of ghasts shambling down the street. During the confused retreat, Gorbanak had slipped a paper with the stone tablet transcription into one of Thorol's robe pockets. As a halfling, he knew that he would soon fall behind the other characters, and he didn't want the evidence on him in case he was somehow captured. Meanwhile, the sergeant major did not run at all, but instead chose to just blend in with the street crowd. He moved along at a leisurely pace, escorting Jomjurt and Horku out of the area. Once the party reassembled, they exited the temple district and crossed back into the foreigners' quarter. The character soon passed by the slave auction house where they had picked up Jomjurt and Horku. They briefly considered stopping in again to make another purchase and reinforce their cover story as slave traders. But they decided against it since Ned Eileen had already said she would tell the bridge guards to be watching for the characters and to allow them to pass. Passing the maid's shop, Thorol gave in to temptation and purchased a scroll of a Drow spell called Skyhook. It allows the caster to create an anchor point suspended in midair, to which can be tied a rope or can be put to any other helpful use. Making their way back to the inn, the characters asked to have the private room again, which was granted. Everyone ordered lunch, but Thorol first went back to his room. He wanted to make a clean copy of Gorbanak's transcription and then work on translating it. When Thorol did return to the group, Jomjurt and Horko were sent back out into the common room, and the door to the private room was closed. Thorol told the others that much of the Elder Elemental God information on the stone tablet was already known to them. However, one new detail he learned is that the Elder Elemental God's prison can be accessed from Lost Home in the Abyss. This meant that if the characters wanted to permanently banish the Elder Elemental God, they would have to venture into the Abyss to get to him. The characters finished lunch, and Thorol even picked up the tab, so pleased he was to have translated the stone tablet. The characters then prepared to leave the inn to try and gain entrance to the bridge guarding the Drow noble lands. Remember, they still needed to find the elemental key, which had been taken from Thorol. They believed it was at Eclavdra's House Isleserve compound located in the Drow noble lands. Suddenly, the Drow girl working for the Mind Flayer Sage arrived. She said her master was aware that the characters had acquired new information regarding the Elder Elemental God, and he would reward them if they would share it with him. So, the characters agreed to go there first. They entered the foreign quarter once again, passing by the now familiar denizens of the place. This time, the succubus did not even attempt to seduce one of the characters. Thorol, Aramis, and Varys went inside, to see the Mind Flayer while the others waited outside. After telling him what they had learned from the stone tablet and giving him a copy of the inscription, the sage handed over a large diamond as a reward for the information. Thorol then asked the Mind Flayer if he knew of any way they could reach Lost Home in the Abyss, as indicated on the stone tablet. The sage said he knew of only one way. Beyond the Drow noble lands, in the deepest recesses of the vault, is located Lost's primary temple called the Great Fane of Loth. Only Lost's most powerful priests maintain the shrine, and only the highest ranking Drow nobles are allowed to worship there. Furthermore, the Fane's great altar is actually a portal to Lost's home in the Abyss, and sacrifices made there are sent directly to her. The Mind Flayer said that this was the only way he knew of by which the characters could travel to Lost's home in the Abyss. Returning to the city proper, the characters arrived at Errolhai Sinlu's main street. They then headed towards the gate guarding the bridge to the Drow noble lands. As they walked along, 2 blade barrier spells suddenly appeared, boxing them in. Immediately thereafter, 2 masses of black tentacles erupted from the street beneath their feet. Unfortunately for them, a couple of Drow passers-by who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time were immediately sliced to pieces by the blade barrier spells. A few other Drow were trapped in the middle space along with the characters. The black tentacles began flailing about, trying to seize victims and pull them into the center of their mass. As per the spell description, if they succeeded, the target had to make a saving throw versus death magic or be killed immediately. If the saving throw was successful, then only some damage was inflicted. If you're wondering about this spell, it is called Ebony Tendrils, and it is only available to high-level priests of Nerul. Gorbadoc immediately began pulling at a nearby sewer grate, but it was too heavy for him to lift. Horko the Goblin was grabbed by the tentacles and, due to his low hit dice, was immediately killed by them. It turns out that the tentacles can reach up to 10 feet, and so Gorbadoc was seized as well. Due to his high-level resistances, he would only be killed by the tentacles on a saving throw result of 1, which is exactly what he rolled. Next, the Sergeant Major was seized and killed by the tentacles, as was a Drow bystander. Obrak was taken as well, but he made his saving throw and received only some damage from the attack. Varys began casting Dispel Magic, but then he was seized by a tentacle, which ruined the spell. Fortunately, he made his saving throw versus Death Magic and only received some damage. Also by now, the character's attackers had come into view. On one side was the band of Nerul clerics who were staying at the same inn as the characters and who had originally brought the stone tablet to Errolhai Sinlu. They also had with them a ghost, which the group's high priestess had forced into helping them. What had happened was, when the characters fled the temple district, they were followed by the priest of Nerul, and he trailed them all the way back to the inn. You can imagine his delight when he realized that the characters were staying at the same inn as were the visiting priests of Nerul. So, while the characters were shut up in the inn's private room eating lunch and making plans, the visiting Nerul clerics were contacted. They were ordered to follow the characters when they left the inn again and ambush them as soon as possible. Meanwhile, on the other side of the attack were the clerics of Ayuz, whom Varys had outbid the day before during the auction for the Elder Elemental God Scroll. They had been shadowing the characters ever since that time, waiting for just the right moment to strike. When the two groups of evil clerics realized that they were both stalking the same target, they quickly formed an alliance. They agreed to coordinate their attack on the characters for maximum effect. They even agreed to share any characters taken alive for torture and eventual sacrifice to their gods. Anyway, moving on. The next combat round, Aramis ran over and pulled Obrak free from the tentacles, while Varys managed to break free on his own. Niobe cast a sunburst spell, hoping to temporarily blind the priest of Neril. And Thorol drank a potion of flying. His plan was to escape the ambush zone and then begin attacking the evil clerics with spells from above. Next round, the Neril clerics off to the left were in fact temporarily blinded by Niobe's sunburst spell, and they could do nothing this round. Garrett, hearing spellcasting coming from the Ayuz clerics off to the right, threw a Christmas gift snowball in hell to disrupt their plans. Meanwhile, Thorol's potion of flying took effect, and he launched himself into the air, and Varys began casting a second Dispel Magic spell. Varys' guard dog, Spuds Mackenzie, had been seized by the tentacles, but he dispelled them before the dog received any damage. By this point in time, the Drow street patrols were alerted to the disturbance and began reacting. The characters could hear their whistles blowing and their running footsteps approaching. Jomchurt now began lifting on the sewer grate, which he had seen Gorbadoc trying to do before he was killed by the Ebony Tendril spell. Although deep gnomes are small, they are very strong due to a lifetime of mining and digging. Because of that, Jomchurt succeeded in lifting the heavy iron sewer grate and rolling it off to the side. By now, both groups of evil clerics had fled at the sound of the approaching Drow patrols. Being priests themselves, they knew very well that if they were captured, they would likely end up on a sacrificial altar dedicated to Loth. Meanwhile, the characters began moving to drop down into the sewer's shaft, since that was the only means of escape available to them. While this was going on, the remaining Ebony Tendril spell expired, releasing the dead bodies it had been holding. The street patrols finally arrived from both directions and, seeing bodies lying about, shouted to the characters that they were under arrest for murdering Drow citizens of Arrowhide Sinlu. However, they were prevented from actually apprehending the characters due to the still active blade barrier spells. Not willing to risk being taken into custody and trying to prove their innocence, the characters instead gathered around the sewer shaft. Aramis stuffed Gorbadoc's body into a sack and then tied it to his backpack, while Thorol dragged the Sergeant Major's body towards the sewer opening. There were ladder rungs set into the wall of the shaft, and Jomchurt climbed in first. Then, one by one, the others followed. Varys slung his dog over his shoulder and held him there with one arm, while Obrak carried Gorbadoc's dog. Thorol waited until last, and then used his still active flying potion to levitate himself and the Sergeant Major's body down into the opening. The Drow patrols saw all of this happening, but were powerless to stop it. They had tried firing their hand crossbows at the characters, but the blade barrier spells destroyed the projectiles before they could do any damage. Alright, well that's all I have for now. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button. If you can, leave a comment. Let me know what you think. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel. And if you know of a good place, please share the video. Anything you can do to help support the channel, I appreciate it. Thanks again. Bye for now.
The greatest adventure is what